You don't get a better life by waiting. You build it, one decisive morning at a time. Everything changes the moment you stop letting the day happen to you and instead choose to meet it like it matters. That single decision, repeated daily, is where all transformation begins. Not with some miracle, not with some future plan, but with the alarm clock and what you do in the first 5 minutes after it rings. If you're tired of feeling stuck, tired of wondering why things aren't moving, the answer might not be as hidden as you think. It might just be in how you're waking up. Because truthfully, most people don't wake up. They just open their eyes. They roll out of bed and immediately slide into routine, not purpose. Their body's moving, but their mind isn't present. They drift into the day as if it owes them something, and then feel defeated when nothing changes. But when you start waking up like your life depends on it, because it does, everything shifts. You begin owning your time, not surrendering it. You stop waiting for motivation and start moving with intention. That's the real difference between those who change and those who coast. It's not luck. It's not talent. It's a decision made every single morning. If you're watching this now, wherever you are in the world, whether it's 5 a.m. in Hanoi or midnight in California, I want you to pause and comment below. Where are you listening from and what time is it? Because that moment right now, this one, is your next chance to choose with clarity how you'll show up. What am I building today? That question alone, asked every morning, can reshape your trajectory. Most people live in reaction. They start their day checking emails, checking messages, checking the temperature of everyone else's life but their own. They start their day behind and stay behind. And they wonder why they're stressed, why they feel like their time isn't their own. You reclaim your life by reclaiming your mornings. You reclaim your mornings by waking up with purpose, not a to-do list, but a mission. And no, your mission doesn't have to be some world-changing cause. Your mission might be building your discipline, fixing your finances, creating a stronger version of yourself, or simply showing up more powerfully than you did yesterday. But whatever it is, it must matter today, not someday. Because someday is a myth that keeps people asleep with their eyes open. Alexander Hamilton once said, "Those who stand for nothing fall for anything." When you wake up without a purpose, you fall into the noise. You fall into distraction. You fall behind, not because you're broken, but because you're untethered. Purpose is your anchor. It sharpens your choices and silences the chaos. It tells you what to say no to. It tells you what deserves your energy. You don't build confidence by wishing for it. You build it by showing up when you said you would. You build it by keeping promises to yourself, even when no one's watching. You build it in silence, one morning at a time. So tomorrow, before you grab your phone, before you check a single notification, sit still. Close your eyes. Breathe. Ask yourself, what do I need to focus on today? Not what's urgent, not what others expect, but what builds you. Because discipline isn't about feeling like it. It's about doing it, especially when you don't. And the truth is, some mornings you won't want to move. You'll want to stay in bed. You'll want to hit snooze on your future. But those are the mornings that define you most. Because the world isn't watching, but you are. And when you keep choosing your growth in private, it starts to show up in public. You speak differently. You move differently. You lead differently. And people will notice, not because you told them, but because the results say it for you. Most people want to feel good before they act, but the people who win, they act, and let the feeling catch up later. That's what waking with purpose looks like. It's not about being busy, it's about being deliberate. And if you don't know your purpose yet, start smaller. Make your purpose showing up for yourself. Make your purpose not wasting this day. Because when you treat time like a currency, when you realize each hour is $1 you'll never get back, you stop giving it away to things that don't grow you. You'd never give your last dollar to someone who hasn't earned it. So why give your last hour to a distraction that steals from your future? Wake up like it matters, because it does. Not in theory, in practice, in how you walk into a room, in how you speak to yourself, in how you spend your attention. That's how you rewire a mindset. Not through hype, not through hope, but through habit. The way you start your day writes the script for everything that follows. And if that script isn't working, then don't edit it halfway through. Start fresh tomorrow. Start by deciding that your time is sacred, that your actions have weight, that your life is a project worth building, not just observing. When you get this habit right, when you master the morning, everything else starts falling into place. You're no longer reacting. You're leading. You're choosing. You're owning. And from here, the next step is simple. Once you've woken with purpose, you have to guard that purpose. Because the world is waiting, and it's armed with noise, with interruptions, with demands. And if you don't plan your day before the world gets to you, you'll lose it before it begins. The moment your feet touch the ground, the world begins pulling at you. Notifications flash, emails stack, people want your attention. If you don't protect your day before it begins, it becomes theirs. That's the truth most people miss. The chaos doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a lack of preparation. And when you don't plan your time, you're giving everyone else permission to waste it for you. The difference between those who thrive and those who just survive isn't intelligence or even talent. It's intentionality. The quiet power of sitting down every morning before the noise and deciding what matters. Not reacting, not scrambling, choosing. You can be busy all day and still fall behind. Productivity isn't about how much you do. It's about how much of what you do actually matters. And what matters can only be clarified before the day gets hijacked. That's why planning first thing isn't optional. It's essential. Take 5 minutes. Sit still. Grab a notebook or your phone. Write down 3 things. Not 20, just 3. The 3 things that, if completed, would make this day meaningful. Ask yourself, what must get done today to move me closer to the life I want? That one question can redefine your focus, because it removes noise, it eliminates distractions, it forces clarity. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, one of history's greatest organizers, once said, "Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable." What he meant is that the real power isn't in the list, it's in the mindset. The act of planning trains your mind to be decisive, intentional, forward-looking. It gets you out of reaction mode and into creation mode. When you plan, you stop overthinking. You stop wondering what to do next. You've already decided. That's the difference between progress and procrastination. People who plan ahead build. People who wing it usually waste. It's not about perfection. You're not building some flawless system. You're simply choosing structure over stress. Because structure is peace. Structure is momentum. Structure is where your future begins to take shape. One block of time, one clear decision, one day at a time. And don't overcomplicate it. You don't need 10 apps or some perfect morning ritual. You need one commitment: to own your time before the world borrows it. Picture this. Your mind is like a whiteboard. Every new request, every new input, every distraction, they start scribbling on it in permanent marker. But when you take time in the morning to write your intention first, you set the tone. You set the ink. Everything else becomes easier to manage or erase. There's something almost sacred about morning planning. It's a conversation between you and your future self. It's you saying, I see you, I value you, and I'm going to act in your best interest today. Because let's be honest, when you don't plan, you fall into what's easiest. And easy is usually scrolling, avoiding, reacting, and repeating. That's not a life, that's a loop. And the only way out of the loop is to get intentional before it restarts. Consider someone like Benjamin Franklin, who began each day asking, what good shall I do this day? And ended each day with, what good have I done? That daily check-in, before and after, created a framework for excellence. Not accidental progress, but deliberate mastery. When you plan your day, you're no longer hoping things get done. You're deciding they will get done. You're not drifting, you're directing. And yes, life will interrupt you. Things will happen. That's part of it. But when you've started the day with clarity, those interruptions don't knock you off course. They're just detours, not derailments. There's also a hidden benefit most people never talk about. Planning reduces anxiety. When your mind is trying to hold everything at once, deadlines, ideas, reminders, worries, it gets overwhelmed. But when you write it down, when you create structure, you give your mind space. And that space is what allows for creativity, calm, and confidence. You're not forgetting anymore. You're not juggling. You're not feeling behind. You're focused. Even the smallest plan, 3 tasks, 10 minutes of deep work, 1 boundary, creates a ripple effect. Because once you do what matters most, you start feeling different. You carry yourself differently. You stop ending the day with regret and start ending it with pride. And yes, it takes discipline. But more than that, it takes honesty. The honesty to ask, where am I wasting time? What do I keep avoiding? What keeps distracting me? Those questions aren't judgment. They're leadership. Self-leadership. Because you're not just managing your calendar, you're managing your energy. And energy is everything. It's your presence, your power, your ability to respond to life, not just react to it. And it begins the moment you decide to take control of your day before anyone else does. The alternative? Drifting, putting out fires, ending the day exhausted and unsure of what actually got done. That's how people burn out. Not from doing too much, but from doing too much of the wrong things. So tomorrow morning, before you open your messages, open a blank page. Before you scroll, sit in silence. Before the noise comes rushing in, decide who you're going to be and what you're going to build. You don't need more time. You need more direction. And direction is found in the quiet spaces before the world starts talking. Plan your day like your future depends on it, because it does. And once that plan is set, there's only one thing left: to protect it from sabotage. And the most dangerous saboteur isn't out there. It's in your head. That little voice that says, not now, later, maybe tomorrow. And if you don't catch it fast, it wins. Which brings us to the next step. Recognizing the moment your mind tries to delay you and moving anyway. There's a voice inside you. You hear it every day, not out loud, but in the spaces between decisions. It whispers when you hesitate. It speaks when you fail. It often sounds like you, but it's not the real you. It's the conditioned echo of past fears, old stories, and beliefs that were never truly yours to begin with. And here's the harsh truth. If you keep listening to that voice without challenging it, it becomes your identity. Self-talk isn't harmless. It's not just background noise. It's a builder of confidence or of collapse. The way you speak to yourself in silence becomes the way you show up in the world. So ask yourself honestly, would you speak to someone you love the way you speak to yourself? Would you call them lazy, unworthy, not good enough? Would you roll your eyes at their effort? Would you tear them down for falling short? No. You'd encourage them. You'd remind them of who they really are. You'd tell them to keep going, that they're growing, that they're capable. That one mistake doesn't erase their worth. So why don't you do that for yourself? Most people never learn to separate thought from truth. They assume that just because a voice in their head says, "I can't handle this," it must be true. But thoughts aren't facts. They're habits. And like all habits, they can be rewired. You can choose to speak to yourself like someone you deeply respect. And the moment you do, everything shifts. Look at history. Thomas Edison failed over 1,000 times before inventing the light bulb. If he had told himself, "I'm a failure," each time he missed, he never would have kept going. But instead of internalizing failure, he reframed it. "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That's the kind of self-respect that keeps progress alive. It's not about toxic positivity or pretending everything is okay. It's about being honest and constructive. You can acknowledge your struggle without shaming yourself for it. You can want more from yourself without calling yourself broken. Start listening to your inner dialogue, noticing the tone, the words, the assumptions. When you hear yourself thinking, "I never follow through," replace it with, "I'm learning to stay consistent." When your mind says, "I always mess this up," respond with, "I'm growing, and that means mistakes are part of it." This isn't fluff. This is training. Mental strength isn't loud. It's built in moments of quiet correction. And don't underestimate the ripple effect. When you speak to yourself with respect, you stop needing so much approval from the outside. You stop chasing validation. You start trusting your own judgment. You begin to move with quiet power, even when no one is clapping. Because confidence doesn't come from applause. It comes from the relationship you have with yourself. And that relationship is shaped one sentence at a time. Remember, your brain believes what you tell it repeatedly. So if you constantly say you're not capable, not smart, not ready, your actions will reflect that. You'll hesitate more. You'll start less. You'll settle faster. But if you train your internal voice to speak strength, not fantasy, but earned belief, your entire experience shifts. The world doesn't change. You do. And that change radiates outward. Now let's get practical. You don't have to speak affirmations into a mirror for hours. You just need awareness and adjustment. When you catch a negative thought, stop. Don't let it pass unchecked. Ask, is this thought helpful? Is it fair? Would I say this to someone I care about? Then reframe it. Not with lies, but with leadership. Replace criticism with correction. Replace judgment with guidance. Replace hopelessness with possibility. Think about how you'd talk to a child who's trying to walk and keeps falling. Would you yell? Would you tell them to give up? Of course not. You'd cheer them on. You'd remind them, you're getting stronger. Keep going. So why don't you deserve the same patience? One of the greatest tests of emotional maturity is how you treat yourself when you fall short. That's where character is built. Not in your wins, but in your stumbles. And if you can meet your own failures with compassion instead of contempt, you'll rise faster and fall less often. Even Navy SEALs, some of the most elite minds on Earth, train their inner voice. They don't leave it to chance. Because in high-pressure situations, your thoughts can be your weapon or your weakness. And they know, if the voice in their head panics, they lose. But if it stays clear, calm, and commanding, they win. So what makes you think your life's battles are any different? You may not be on a battlefield, but you are facing pressure. You are navigating doubt. You are fighting against the gravity of comfort and the weight of old patterns. And if your inner voice isn't leading you forward, it's holding you back. Respectful self-talk builds resilience. It gives you the courage to start, the strength to stay, and the grace to begin again. It makes you less reactive and more intentional, less fragile and more grounded. Because when the world gets loud, your voice becomes your shelter. When others doubt you, your voice becomes your truth. And when you're alone in the hard moments, your voice becomes your guide. This is where the rewiring really begins. Not in action, but in how you speak to yourself before the action happens. So from now on, build a new internal standard. Speak to yourself like someone who deserves to win, because you do. But that belief only sticks if you say it often enough for your mind to stop fighting it. And as that belief becomes natural, it sets the stage for the next critical shift. Not just how you talk to yourself, but how you respond to your own hesitation. Because the next great battle isn't just emotional, it's behavioral. It's what you do when your mind says, wait, later, not now. And if you don't break that moment, it'll break your momentum. There's a razor-thin moment, a sliver of time so quick most people miss it, between the thought, I should, and the action, I will. And in that space, entire lives are decided. That's the battlefield of personal growth. Not in the grand gestures or big dreams, but in the tiny pauses where your brain offers you an easy exit. Not now. Later. Maybe tomorrow. That's the voice of delay. It doesn't scream. It whispers, and it sounds rational. Friendly, even. It offers rest, convenience, and the illusion of control. But behind that softness is sabotage. Because every time you listen, you're not just pausing. You're practicing hesitation. And hesitation is how progress dies. The hardest part of any task is not doing it. It's starting it. The few seconds before you move, that's where all the resistance lives. And that's where you must be sharpest. Because the longer you wait, the stronger the delay grows. The heavier the task feels, the easier it becomes to justify doing it later. And the more often you delay, the less you trust yourself to follow through. You're not lazy. You're just stuck in a pattern, a neurological loop. The mind resists discomfort by default. It's designed to keep you safe. But safety isn't the same as growth. And if you don't challenge that loop, it becomes your lifestyle. But here's the good news. You can break the delay in a single move. You act before you're ready, before it feels good, before it's convenient. You move, and in that movement, you send a message to your brain. I lead now. Mel Robbins called it the 5-second rule. Count backward from 5 and move before hesitation steals your agency. And while the method is simple, the principle is profound. The faster you act, the less power resistance has. This doesn't mean acting without thinking. It means acting before overthinking. Because overthinking is just fear in disguise. It makes simple things feel impossible, and the only cure is motion. Not a full solution, not a completed project, just a single step, When Navy pilots are trained for emergency ejections, they don't sit and evaluate feelings. They're taught procedures, fast, practiced, ingrained. Why? Because delay kills. The same applies to your goals. Not with life or death drama, but with quiet erosion. Delay slowly drains your potential. One day at a time, one excuse at a time. Think about this. How many goals in your life are waiting? Not because you don't care, but because you keep delaying. That conversation you know you need to have. That project you said you'd finish last month. That commitment you keep telling yourself you'll start Monday. It's not time you're lacking. It's execution. And execution isn't about motivation. It's about training your identity to respond differently. When your brain says, "Let's wait," your new reflex must be, "Let's begin." And yes, that's hard. At first. Because you've practiced delay for years. But the more you break that loop with action, the weaker the hesitation becomes. You stop associating discomfort with danger. You start recognizing it as a signal for growth. This is how athletes train. Not just their bodies, but their response time. They don't wait for perfect conditions. They act, especially when it's hard. Because that's where the edge is, the separator. Everyone can act when it's easy, but those who succeed act when it's not. Look at history. Rosa Parks didn't plan for that exact moment on the bus, but when it came, she didn't delay. She decided. That moment of resistance changed a movement. Not because she had energy or clarity or support, but because she moved when her mind might have said to wait. Now your battle may not be social revolution, but it's still real, and the cost of delay is still significant. It's your dreams, your health, your focus, your confidence. The more you delay, the heavier your guilt becomes. The more you avoid, the less trustworthy you feel to yourself. And that erosion eats away at your belief until all that's left is someone who used to try. But you can stop that decay with one decisive act. Get up when the alarm rings. Respond to the message you've been avoiding. Start the workout. Write the first sentence. Open the book. Begin, even if it's messy, because motion fuels motivation, not the other way around. Once you move, clarity returns. Energy picks up. The task feels lighter. The story in your head quiets down. And what felt impossible 10 seconds ago becomes manageable. That's the real power of momentum. It's not just movement. It's movement that rewrites belief. The more you act despite resistance, the more you believe you can. And that belief upgrades your identity. You're no longer someone who needs perfect conditions. You're someone who moves anyway. Imagine the shift. Imagine being the person who doesn't delay, who acts, who gets things done not just when it's easy, but especially when it's inconvenient. That's not talent. That's a practiced habit. And like any habit, it's built one decision at a time. One override. One interruption of the hesitation loop. So from now on, make a rule for yourself. When I feel the urge to delay, I act instead. You don't need to finish the task. You just need to begin. And once you do, something powerful happens. The delay loses its grip. The resistance fades. The version of you that wants growth steps forward. You become someone who follows through. You build self-respect, not by thinking highly of yourself, but by proving that you can trust yourself. And that proof becomes a cycle. Action, confidence, more action, stronger identity. So the next time your mind says, "Not now," don't argue. Move. And if you're tired, start small. If you're unsure, take the tiniest next step. But don't wait, because every delay trains you to expect comfort, and every action trains you to expect growth. Your future doesn't respond to intention. It responds to execution. And from this place of decisive movement, you're ready to face the next challenge. Not just starting, but finishing. Because starting is easy. Finishing is what separates those who dream from those who build. Anyone can start. Starting is exciting. Starting feels fresh. Starting gives you the illusion of progress, the emotional high of taking that first step. But starting means nothing without finishing. Because the real growth, the real breakthrough, the real transformation, it all happens after the excitement wears off. This is the point where most people fall off. Not because they're not capable, but because they're not trained to push through the middle. The middle is messy. The middle is boring. The middle is where you meet resistance in its most deceptive form. Fatigue, distraction, self-doubt. And it's also where your identity gets forged. Finishing is a discipline, not a mood. It's what you do when you're tired, when no one's cheering, when the novelty is gone and all that's left is the work. It's what builds character. It's what builds self-respect. Because every time you finish something you start, no matter how small, you're proving to yourself, I follow through. Let's be clear. This isn't about perfection. It's not about completing everything flawlessly. It's about keeping your word to yourself. About honoring the commitment you made, even when no one's watching. Think of it like this. Every unfinished task is a crack in your confidence. Every half-done effort is a quiet message to your brain. I can't be trusted to finish. And when those messages stack, they shape how you see yourself. That's how people drift into inconsistency. Not from laziness, but from accumulated self-doubt built by unfinished work. But you can break that pattern today. You don't need a massive gesture. You just need to finish one thing. The email you've been avoiding. The workout you almost completed. The room you half cleaned. Close the loop. Shut the open tab in your mind, because unfinished work doesn't just take up time. It steals energy. It lingers in your head. It nags at your focus. It becomes mental clutter that weighs you down and slows you up. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine finishing what you start. Not perfectly, but consistently. Imagine the lightness of crossing something off your list, not just to feel busy, but to feel clear. That clarity builds momentum, and momentum makes the next task easier. It creates a rhythm, a pulse, a standard, and standards matter. What you allow becomes your identity. If you let yourself stop halfway, that becomes your baseline. But if you finish, even when it's hard, even when it's dull, even when no one else will notice, that becomes your new normal. You become the kind of person who finishes. Serena Williams once said, "Champions keep playing until they get it right." She didn't say they play until they're tired, or until it's hard, or until it's good enough. They finish, and that doesn't take talent. That takes choice. The choice to push through when your mood says stop. The choice to keep going when your comfort begs for rest. The choice to close the chapter you opened. Even a simple act of completion, folding the laundry you started, submitting the form you filled, completing the journal you wrote half of, becomes a statement of self-integrity. And integrity is internal power. It's the kind of power that doesn't need validation. It doesn't need a crowd. It just is. But finishing requires something most people resist. Urgency. Not panic. Not rush. But presence. A refusal to carry today's tasks into tomorrow. Because the longer something stays unfinished, the heavier it becomes. The more excuses you give it, the more it owns you. That's why you must develop a mindset of daily completion. If something gets your time today, it also gets your finish line. You don't leave it open. You don't pass it to tomorrow. You handle it. It might be small. It might seem trivial. But the weight it lifts is massive. Completion clears mental bandwidth. It clears emotional noise. It clears the internal debate. And in that space, focus returns. Look at the most productive people. They're not always the fastest or smartest, but they finish. And because they finish, they stack results. Those results become confidence. That confidence becomes identity. And identity, that's what shapes destiny. This isn't theory. This is neuroscience. Every time you complete a task, your brain releases dopamine, the chemical of progress. It doesn't need to be a massive achievement. Even the smallest win triggers reward, and those rewards reinforce behavior. So if you want to become someone who finishes, give yourself more finish lines and cross them. Ask yourself now, what have I started and left hanging? What's open in my world that's draining me without me even realizing it? And more importantly, what can I finish today? Because completion isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters, fully. It's not about stacking tasks, but about stacking closures. About learning to live with fewer loose ends. Because every loose end is an open loop in your nervous system. And when you have too many loops, you feel overwhelmed, disorganized, and behind. Even if you've been working hard, you don't need more hustle. You need more completion. And finishing isn't just about the task. It changes the way you show up in other areas of life. Finish the workout, and you'll carry that discipline into how you eat. Finish the conversation, and you'll carry that clarity into your relationships. Finish the journal entry, and your mind becomes sharper in decisions. It all stacks, it all builds, it all matters. But none of it works if you keep quitting halfway. If you keep convincing yourself that later is a plan. Later is a trap. Later becomes never, unless you draw the line now. So do it. Finish the thing. Even if it's not fun. Even if it's not pretty. Even if it won't go viral. Do it because you said you would. Do it because that's who you're becoming. And once you've mastered this, once finishing becomes familiar, there's something else to confront. A different kind of discipline. The discipline to protect your time and energy, not just from distraction, but from everything that drains and dilutes your focus. Because you can't finish strong if you keep giving your power to things that don't build you. You don't lose your energy all at once. It leaks, silently, invisibly, moment by moment, through choices you barely notice. One unnecessary yes, one draining conversation, one mindless scroll, one favor you agreed to out of guilt. And suddenly, it's 3 p.m., and you're exhausted without having done anything that mattered. That's not laziness. That's energy mismanagement. And the root cause? A refusal to say no. Saying no isn't rude. It's revolutionary. In a world that constantly pulls at your attention, your energy is your most valuable currency. You can't build anything meaningful if it's constantly being spent on things that don't matter. The truth is, energy doesn't just come from sleep or food. It comes from boundaries, from having the clarity and courage to protect what fuels you. And that protection begins with a simple but powerful habit: saying no to what drains you. You're not supposed to say yes to everything. You're not supposed to be available 24/7. You're not supposed to carry the weight of everyone else's needs while ignoring your own. But many people do, not because they're weak, but because they've never been taught the power of a clear, firm, respectful no. And here's the cost. When you give your time to things that don't align with your values, you slowly lose sight of what does. You start waking up tired. You start working without joy. You start filling your days with noise instead of meaning. It's not because you're doing too much. It's because you're doing too much of what doesn't matter. Steve Jobs famously said, "Focusing is about saying no." He wasn't talking about being dismissive. He was talking about guarding the mission, about filtering out the noise to protect the signal. And your life is no different. If you want clarity, focus, and progress, you need to be ruthless about what you allow into your mental space. Start with an audit. Ask yourself, who or what drains me? What obligations do I keep saying yes to that leave me empty? What distractions steal my time and return nothing? These aren't judgment questions. They're leadership questions. The kind you ask if you truly want to take command of your life. Because the people who grow, the ones who make lasting impact, the ones who stay strong over time, they don't just do more. They protect more. They know that every yes is a no to something else, and they refuse to say yes to things that take them further from their purpose. You're not a machine. You can't just push through everything, and even if you could, you'd lose the most important thing in the process, your alignment. The sense that what you're doing actually feeds your soul instead of depleting it. And sometimes, the most strategic thing you can do is cancel the meeting. Decline the invitation, mute the group chat, step away from the energy vampire. Not because you don't care, but because you do care. About your mission, about your energy, about building a life that feels like yours. There's nothing noble about exhaustion. Burning yourself out to please people who wouldn't notice if you disappeared for a week. That's not generosity. That's a boundary issue. And the more you normalize overextending yourself, the more people will expect it from you. You train others how to treat you by what you allow. Say yes to everything, and they'll assume your time is free. Say no with clarity and kindness, and they'll learn to respect your presence when it's given. Saying no isn't about pushing people away. It's about creating space for what matters. It's about making room for depth instead of drowning in width. It's not easy at first. You'll feel guilt. You'll worry about disappointing others. But here's the truth. You're already disappointing someone, usually yourself. And if someone gets upset because you chose to protect your energy, they were never honoring you in the first place. This doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming clear. It doesn't mean being unavailable. It means being unavailable to what breaks you. And clarity gives you back time, focus, and strength. The strength to say, this is not mine to carry. The focus to say, this does not feed my purpose. The courage to say, I matter too. Even a small no creates a shift. Turning down that extra obligation. Choosing rest over one more commitment. Logging off early. That's how you begin rewiring your life. Not through massive change, but through micro boundaries. And in time, it becomes easier. You stop explaining. You stop justifying. You stop apologizing for protecting what's sacred. Because you realize your peace is not up for negotiation. Your energy is not public property. Your purpose is not a group project. And once you reclaim that energy, you start feeling it again. The drive, the clarity, the fire. You're no longer scattered. You're centered. You're no longer dragged around. You're directed because you've learned to protect the source. And that protection doesn't just help you get through the day. It helps you grow into your next level. Because now that your energy is yours again, you have room to invest it. Not in what depletes you, but in what sharpens you. And that's where we go next. Into the habit that doesn't just protect your energy, but multiplies it. The habit of feeding your mind something sharp, something meaningful, every single day. Growth doesn't happen by accident. You don't stumble into mental strength or awaken one day with sharpened awareness. You build it deliberately, patiently, and daily by feeding your mind something that challenges, stretches, and sharpens it. The world moves fast. Information floods your attention every second. And if you're not intentional about what you absorb, your mind becomes a dumping ground for whatever noise is loudest. But when you commit to learning just one new thing every day, one idea, one insight, one mental upgrade, you start rewiring your brain for clarity, strength, and decision-making. And that one habit sets you apart from the crowd faster than any external tactic ever could. You don't need to read a book a week. You don't need to memorize 100 quotes. You just need to feed your mind something that sharpens your thinking. A concept, a challenge, a principle. A truth that makes you pause and ask, how can I live this better? It could be 5 pages from a book on self-discipline, a single podcast episode on time mastery, a quote from a Stoic thinker, a reflection on a conversation from the day before. It doesn't matter where it comes from. What matters is that you choose it, consciously, daily. The mind is like a blade. If you don't sharpen it, it dulls. If you let it sit in routine and repetition, it starts to rust. And most people are walking around with dull minds, not because they're unintelligent, but because they've stopped learning. They stopped after graduation, stopped after getting the job, stopped after figuring out enough to get by. And now they're running on outdated software, reacting instead of responding, assuming instead of analyzing, repeating instead of growing. But you don't have to stay stuck. You can be a student for life. And that doesn't mean sitting in a classroom. It means walking into every day with the mindset, what can I learn from this? Because when you're learning, you're leading, you're upgrading, you're pulling ahead while everyone else is plateauing. Let's look at someone like Warren Buffett, one of the most successful investors in history. Do you know how he spends the majority of his day? Reading, not trading, not hustling, reading. He knows that his mind is his biggest asset, and the sharper it is, the clearer his decisions become. And this doesn't just apply to business. It applies to relationships, to conflict, to emotional regulation, to creativity. When your thinking is clear, your life becomes clearer. You make better choices. You pause instead of react. You spot patterns others miss. You solve problems with less drama and more direction. Mental sharpness is a superpower, especially in a world addicted to distraction. And it's built one bite at a time. But you have to be intentional. You have to curate your inputs. Not all information is created equal. If you spend all day watching rage-bait content, arguing in comment sections and scrolling endlessly through noise, don't be surprised if your mindset starts to fracture. That's not learning. That's emotional junk food. It fills you but leaves you empty. Instead, create a learning ritual. Something small, repeatable, sustainable. Maybe every morning before you open email, you read 3 pages of a book that inspires you. Maybe every commute, you listen to a podcast that teaches you something new. Maybe every evening, you write down one insight from the day. Something you observed, questioned, or learned. That consistency creates compound growth. You won't notice it right away. But weeks pass, months pass, and suddenly, your mind feels different. You speak with more weight. You respond with more clarity. You carry yourself with more groundedness. And people notice. Not because you're louder, but because you're sharper. And that sharpness gives you an edge. In conflict, you stay calm. In chaos, you stay centered. When others spiral, you see clearly. Because you've been training, not just your body, but your mind. Think of it like going to the gym. You wouldn't expect to get strong by lifting once and quitting. The same applies here. You can't expect a powerful mindset from passive living. You must work it, lift it, stretch it, challenge it. And sometimes that means confronting ideas that feel uncomfortable, learning something that challenges your old beliefs, sitting with perspectives that push you to think deeper, not just louder. That's where the real growth lives. Not in reinforcing what you already know, but in expanding what you're willing to understand. And over time, this habit becomes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who's just trying to keep up. You start seeing yourself as someone who leads, who learns, who adapts. Because in a world where most people scroll, you study. In a world where most people consume, you absorb. In a world where most people argue, you ask better questions. And that kind of mental muscle becomes a magnet for better conversations, better ideas, better decisions. You become someone who isn't easily swayed by noise because you've trained yourself to seek substance. So from now on, make it a rule. One new thing every day. That's it. One idea that makes you better. One insight that makes you think. One truth that brings you closer to who you're becoming. Because you don't need more content. You need more conscious learning. You need more deliberate thought. You need more intentional sharpening. And once this becomes your norm, the next time your mood begins to slip, the next time your energy dips and your motivation fades, you'll have the tools to catch it. Because you've built mental clarity. And now, it's time to activate that clarity through movement. To shift your emotional state not with thought, but with action. Your mood isn't permanent. It's not your identity. It's a state, one that shifts like the weather. But here's the part most people miss. You don't have to wait for it to change. You can move it, literally. Because your body and mind aren't separate systems. They're one. They speak to each other constantly. And the fastest way to change what's happening in your mind is to move your body. It sounds almost too simple, but that's the brilliance of it. Movement, standing up, walking around, stretching, even just changing posture, is often enough to interrupt a downward emotional spiral. When you move, your physiology changes. Your blood flows differently. Your breathing shifts. Your brain receives new signals, and with those new signals, your mood begins to rewire. Most people make the mistake of waiting. They wait until they feel better to take action. But that's backward. You don't feel better and then move. You move and then feel better. It's the movement that creates the mental shift, not the other way around. And you've experienced this before, haven't you? Think of a time when you felt foggy, stressed, or stuck, and then you went for a walk, or stepped outside, or stretched your body for 2 minutes. It didn't solve every problem, but it did reset your state. It gave you breathing room. It cleared the mental static. That's not a coincidence. That's biology. Low moods thrive in stillness. They gain power when you sit too long, stay hunched over, keep staring at the same screen, running the same thoughts. But the moment you interrupt the pattern with movement, you interrupt the story too. Suddenly, what felt overwhelming starts to shrink. Not because the problem vanished, but because you changed your position in relation to it. This is why elite performers, athletes, speakers, military leaders, use movement rituals before big moments. Jumping, pacing, shaking out tension. It's not superstition, it's state control. And it's something you can build into your daily life. You don't need to wait for a breakdown to start moving. Use movement proactively. Build it into your rhythm. When your mind gets cluttered, walk. When a meeting drains you, Stretch. When a task feels heavy, stand up and breathe deeply. Movement doesn't have to be a workout. It just has to be intentional. And if you're in a bad mood right now, if your day has been spiraling and your thoughts feel stuck, move right now, even while listening. Roll your shoulders, stand up and stretch. Take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale slowly. Tilt your head to one side, then the other. Notice how even these small physical shifts start to lift your awareness. That's not magic, that's mechanics. Your posture tells your mind how to feel. Slumped shoulders, shallow breath, tight muscles, they signal defeat. But open posture, full breath, even just walking with a little pace, they signal readiness. They signal strength. This is especially true during times of emotional weight. When stress builds, when anxiety hums in the background, when motivation is gone. Those are the moments where movement becomes your tool. Not a fix for everything, but a lever to change how you feel. Enough to act, enough to get unstuck, enough to begin again. Look at history. Theodore Roosevelt, known for his relentless energy, took long walks, sometimes hours long, to process thoughts and regain clarity. He once walked 20 miles just to clear his mind before making a major decision. He understood that clarity isn't always found in thinking harder. It's found in moving differently. And this applies even more now. We live in a world where it's normal to sit for 10 hours a day, hunch over phones, live in screens. No wonder our minds feel sluggish, our emotions stagnant. Our biology was built for motion, and we've replaced it with stillness. That stillness becomes a breeding ground for mental and emotional fog. But you don't need to run marathons. You just need to interrupt the inertia. Motion before emotion. That's the principle. Move first, then let the mood catch up. Start your mornings with light activity. Do 5 squats before you check your phone. Walk the room while thinking. Stand during a call. Breathe fully. Even these micro movements create momentum. And momentum is everything, because the moment you start moving, the resistance begins to dissolve. The hardest part of a workout isn't the workout. It's the first step. The hardest part of cleaning the house isn't the chore. It's getting up to start. But once you're in motion, things shift. The weight gets lighter. The excuses fade. The energy returns. And this habit of moving through resistance builds more than mood control. It builds resilience. It teaches you that you don't have to be at your best to start. You just need to start, and trust that movement will carry you the rest of the way. This is the difference between those who spiral and those who stabilize. It's not that one group never feels low, it's that they know how to rise from it. They've trained their nervous system to respond to challenge with action, not withdrawal. And here's the best part. Movement is always available to you. You don't need equipment. You don't need a gym. You just need to decide to take the next breath, the next step, the next stretch. Because every time you do, you're reminding your brain, we're not stuck. We're shifting. You're building a habit that not only lifts your day, but strengthens your entire system. And once you've stabilized your state, once you've lifted the fog with movement, you're in the perfect position to reflect. To turn inward and ask the most important question of the day. Not what got done, but what improved. Because that's the real mark of growth. Not perfection, not speed, but daily, conscious improvement. The day is done. The noise fades. The tasks are behind you. And now, in the quiet, you stand face to face with yourself. Not the version others see, but the one who lived this day. This is the moment that separates motion from progress. Not, did I check every box? But did I get better today? That one question, what improved today, has the power to change your life. Not overnight, but through slow, deliberate self-awareness. It brings you out of autopilot. It forces you to see not just what happened, but who you were while it happened. Because being busy isn't the same as becoming better. A full calendar doesn't mean you're growing. Progress is found in how you live, in the micro decisions, the small wins, the quiet corrections you make when no one is watching. You might have had a hard day. That's okay. That's not what matters. What matters is, did you improve? Even in one area? Even in one moment? Maybe you caught yourself before reacting. Maybe you finished what you usually would have abandoned. Maybe you said no when you'd usually cave in. That's progress. Maybe you simply showed up when your mind begged you not to. That's improvement. And improvement deserves recognition. But most people never pause long enough to see it. They close the laptop, scroll a little more, collapse into bed, and repeat. And they wonder why they feel like nothing's changing. Why life feels like a treadmill. It's not because they're not growing. It's because they're not noticing. And what you don't notice, you don't reinforce. Growth ignored becomes growth abandoned. But when you pause, just for 5 minutes, and ask yourself, where did I improve? You give your brain the chance to register progress. That registration builds belief, and belief becomes momentum. Journaling is powerful for this, not just to vent, but to witness your own development, to track the way you're changing, to see the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. You don't need a fancy system, just a notebook, a phone note, a voice memo. Ask yourself, what did I do today that my past self would be proud of? Where did I show up stronger than I felt? What small thing did I finally stop avoiding? Even one line of reflection is enough to reframe the entire day. And some days, the improvement will be obvious. You'll crush a workout, finish a project, hold your boundary, speak up when it mattered. Those days are easy to track, but other days, it'll be subtle. You'll choose not to spiral. You'll calm yourself down. You'll do less instead of overreaching. You'll forgive yourself faster. That's growth too. And sometimes it's the most important kind, because growth isn't always visible. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet shift in your attitude, the softening of old habits, the decision to breathe instead of break. Reflecting on that intentionally trains your mind to value process over perfection, and over time, that mindset becomes unshakable. People who reflect don't just grow faster, they grow deeper. They become more in tune with their patterns. They catch themselves sooner. They correct with compassion instead of self-hate. They know when they're repeating old loops, and they know how to break them. Reflection gives you data, real, emotional, internal data, and data brings clarity. You stop asking, why am I stuck? And start seeing exactly where and why you slow down. And then you adjust. That's how champions think. Not just by pushing harder, but by understanding themselves better. Michael Jordan once said, "You can practice shooting 8 hours a day, but if your technique is wrong, all you become is very good at shooting the wrong way." The same applies to life. You can work hard all day, but if you're not improving your form, your effort just deepens the wrong habits. Reflection is where you check the form. It's where you refine, where you get honest, where you slow down just long enough to speed up tomorrow. And yes, it takes effort. At first, it's easier to distract yourself, to say, whatever, I'll think about it later. But later becomes never. And then weeks pass, months pass, and you don't even recognize yourself. Not because you didn't try, but because you didn't track. But 5 minutes can change that. 5 minutes to own your story, to reclaim the narrative, to decide what carries forward and what ends tonight. Ask, what did I do today that I'm proud of? What mistake did I make that taught me something? What would I do differently if I could rewind just this day? That's not overthinking. That's inner leadership. And if you make this a habit, daily, non-negotiable, something powerful begins to shift. You start seeing every day as a building block. You stop chasing perfection. You stop comparing. You start appreciating your own evolution. You begin to notice things others miss. The way your patience has stretched. The way your confidence has grown. The way your standards have quietly risen. That's the stuff that changes your life, not just your to-do list. And here's something most people don't tell you. Self-respect isn't just about what you do. It's about what you notice. When you acknowledge your effort, your courage, your subtle wins, you feel more whole. You stop needing external praise. You stop waiting for someone to clap for you, because you already know you showed up, you grew, you improved, and that's enough. So make this your daily ritual, not just before bed, but as the punctuation mark on your day. Your reset, your moment of truth. Because once you start seeing your growth clearly, you'll start chasing it intentionally. You'll want more, not because you're broken, but because you're becoming. And that craving to become more, to refine, to improve, to grow, it makes the next habit feel natural. Because once you see your growth, you'll want to protect it, cement it, turn it into identity. And the only way to do that is to repeat it until it's who you are. Consistency is not glamorous. It doesn't shout. It doesn't trend. It won't impress anyone on the first day. But it's the invisible force behind every transformation that ever lasted. It's the difference between inspiration that fades and identity that sticks. Because real change isn't built on the days you feel like it. It's built on the days you do it anyway. That's the power of sticking to good habits until they feel natural. Most people stop too soon. They start with energy, with clarity, with the best intentions. But then discomfort shows up. The schedule shifts. Life interrupts. And they confuse hard with wrong. So they pause. They slip. They label themselves inconsistent. And they reinforce the identity of someone who just can't stick with things. But the truth is, they never stayed in the repetition long enough for the resistance to fade. Habits only become natural when you've practiced them through every emotional state. Tired, bored, frustrated, unmotivated. That's the real threshold. The moment when the habit no longer feels like a challenge, but like a rhythm. Let's be real. No one feels motivated every day. Even the most disciplined people don't wake up excited to do the hard things. What separates them is what they do when motivation isn't there. They've trained a default, a system, a habit that kicks in regardless of how they feel. You don't need to do it perfectly. You just need to keep doing it. Over and over. Not forever. Just long enough for it to become you. And that's what most people underestimate. How identity is formed. Not in breakthroughs, but in repeated actions. Not in public victories, but in private consistency. Take brushing your teeth. You don't debate it. You don't ask, do I feel aligned with this today? You just do it. Why? Because the behavior has been wired into your routine. It's part of your identity. Now imagine if movement, planning, reflection, or self-talk had the same ease. Not because you forced it every day, but because you finished the transition. You stuck with the behavior until it felt like breathing. That's where the breakthrough lives. Not in starting something new, in staying with something good. And yes, you'll miss a day. You'll fall off. You'll forget. That's not failure. That's normal. The test isn't whether you stumble. It's how quickly you return. People who win don't avoid falling. They just don't let a single misstep become a new pattern. They treat a missed day as a blip, not a backslide. They return without guilt. They continue as if they never stopped. That's why you must stop tying your habits to motivation. Tie them to identity. Don't say, "I'm trying to be consistent." Say, "I'm a consistent person." Don't say, "I'm trying to get fit." Say, "I'm someone who moves daily." Don't say, "I want to journal." Say, "I reflect because I lead myself." When the behavior becomes tied to who you are, not just what you want, you stop negotiating with it. You start living it. And it's not about doing massive things. It's about small, powerful repetitions. 10 minutes of focus. 1 act of courage. 1 note of reflection. These aren't insignificant. They're anchors. Think of compound interest. A few dollars saved daily doesn't look like much until it does. The same applies to habits. The payoff isn't always immediate, but the cost of quitting too early is invisible regret, and that regret builds slowly. I wish I had kept going. If I had just stayed with it another week. I was almost there. Those aren't just thoughts. They're echoes from an identity that almost changed. Don't live in almost. Stay long enough for the shift to settle in. Long enough for discipline to become autopilot. Long enough for the results to stop surprising you, because they now match who you are. Even scientists confirm this. Building a habit isn't about 21 days or 66 days. It's about reps. Repeating the behavior enough times that the brain stops seeing it as a threat and starts seeing it as a norm. Norms don't require willpower, they just run. And once your habit runs without you pushing it, you free up mental energy. You stop fighting to get started. You stop thinking so hard about it. You just do it. And that's when growth accelerates. So instead of asking, "How long until this gets easier?" start asking, "How many times will I repeat this until I don't question it?" And then, repeat it again. When it's hard, repeat. When it's boring, repeat. When no one sees you, repeat. When you're tired, repeat. When you feel like quitting, especially repeat. That's how you build the life you want, in repetition. In finishing the process, not once, but until it becomes identity. And once you own that mindset, once you see consistency not as pressure but as freedom, you step into a new level of self-respect. Because you know what happens when your habits feel natural? You stop chasing growth. You start embodying it. You don't wake up and wonder who you are. You know. You don't wait to become your best self. You show up as them. And from that place, something sacred happens. The behaviors that once felt like effort now feel like home. And that's the beginning of a whole new rhythm. But we're not finished yet. There's one more shift to make. One that connects all of this together. The habit of breaking old loops and reinforcing new patterns. Not with force, but with the smallest decisions made in the smallest moments. Because those micro-decisions are what either pull you back or propel you forward. Change isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, built in the smallest moments, with decisions so subtle they're easy to miss. A glance at the clock and the choice to stay focused. A familiar craving followed by a quiet no. The urge to escape through distraction, interrupted by a breath and a better intention. These are the micro-decisions that define whether you stay stuck in your past patterns or step forward into your next level. We love to talk about big turning points, dramatic breakthroughs, life-altering moments. But most of the time, What really shifts your life isn't one massive decision. It's 1,000 small ones. And these small decisions happen in the in-between. When no one's watching. When there's no audience. When it's just you. A trigger and a choice. And this is where old patterns live. Not in your calendar, but in your reflexes. A notification hits. Do you open it or stay in flow? Your emotions rise. Do you lash out or pause and breathe? You feel resistance. Do you check out or lean in? These tiny junctions might seem insignificant, but they stack. Every time you choose the familiar loop, avoidance, delay, escape, you reinforce the old identity. Not with words, but with actions. And your brain learns. This is who we are. But when you interrupt the loop, when you act differently, even slightly, you open a new path. And that path, repeated, becomes your next level. The problem is, most people don't even realize they're in a loop. They wake up, repeat the same habits, follow the same distractions, feel the same frustrations, and call it life. But it's not life. It's programming. And the only way to rewrite the program is to pause and choose differently. That choice doesn't have to be big. In fact, it shouldn't be. Trying to overhaul your entire routine overnight rarely works. But one new decision in a moment where you'd normally default, that's how you break the cycle. Let's make it practical. You usually wake up and scroll? Tomorrow, you wake up and sit still for 60 seconds instead. You normally skip workouts when you're tired? Today, you do 10 push-ups. Just 10. You always grab a snack when you're bored? This time, you drink a full glass of water first and wait 5 minutes. You don't need to be heroic. You need to be aware. And once you're aware, you need to be willing. Willing to choose something slightly better, consistently, until it becomes natural. Even neuroscience backs this. The brain operates through neural pathways. The more you use a pathway, the more you default to a certain behavior, the stronger it becomes. But every time you interrupt that signal, every time you carve a new response, you weaken the old loop. And if you repeat the new one enough, it becomes your new default. That's neuroplasticity. That's freedom. Because freedom isn't just doing whatever you want. It's not being controlled by your conditioning. It's making decisions based on who you're becoming, not who you've been. One of the most overlooked truths in personal development is this: identity follows action. You don't become confident by waiting to feel confident. You become confident by acting in small ways a confident person would, and letting your brain catch up. You don't become focused by waiting to feel inspired. You become focused by showing up with discipline, even when your mind is loud and scattered. And the fastest way to change your identity is through micro decisions. The seemingly insignificant shifts that say, "I'm done living on repeat." Look at people who've transformed, physically, emotionally, financially. Their story didn't start with a grand event. It started with a tiny rebellion against who they used to be. They said no to one drink. They went for one walk. They saved $1. They asked one question. They opened one book. That's how the snowball starts. Not in drama, in deliberate defiance of the old pattern. And the beautiful thing? The more you choose the new behavior, the easier it gets. At first, it feels forced. Then it feels possible. Then it becomes normal. And here's what's most empowering. You never have to wait for the right time again. Because the right time is always now, the moment the loop starts. That's the moment you reclaim your power. So how do you know you're about to hit a loop? Watch for these signs. You hear yourself thinking, "Just this once." You feel a pull to escape or numb. You rationalize something that contradicts your goals. You reach for something to fill a moment of discomfort. That's the loop. That's the old code. And in that moment, your job isn't to be perfect. It's to choose differently. Take one breath, interrupt the pattern, move your body, speak a new thought, reach for the better option. Walk away. That one small shift is your victory. That's how you build trust with yourself. And trust is what fuels momentum. Because when you trust yourself to interrupt, you start believing that you can lead. You become the kind of person who doesn't just have habits, but authors them. You stop reacting to life and start rewriting it. And you do that one micro decision at a time. The next time the loop calls, pause, smile. You know what it is. And this time, you're not playing along. You're choosing a new pattern. And once that new pattern is in motion, it connects to something bigger. Something that expands your potential beyond resistance and rewiring. A decision that fuels everything. The choice to discipline your attention. Because without that focus, no habit can hold. And that's where we go next. Not into more action, but into intentional direction. Because when you learn to choose what you give your focus to, everything else accelerates. In a world that's louder than ever, your most valuable asset isn't your time, it's your attention. Where your focus goes, your energy flows. And where your energy flows, your life grows or collapses. If you don't discipline your focus, the world will do it for you. Algorithms, advertisements, anxiety, all of it is designed to hijack your mind. And if you don't take the wheel, you'll wake up in a life you never intended to build. Focus is your steering wheel. Discipline is your grip. Together, they dictate your direction. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be precise. You don't need to do more. You need to do what matters with your full attention. The truth? Most people aren't tired from doing too much. They're tired from doing too little of what's important and too much of what isn't. They scatter their energy across half-finished tasks, distractions, dopamine hits, and mindless repetition. And they wonder why they feel depleted, overwhelmed, unaccomplished. But you're not here for scattered effort. You're here for intentional direction. This is where discipline becomes your superpower. Not punishment, not restriction, freedom. Because when you train your focus, you free yourself from the noise. You give yourself the ability to say, not now, not that, not for me. And that one boundary, that refusal to chase everything, gives you back your mind. Look at any master, any top performer, any human who has created something meaningful. They have one thing in common. They know how to guard their attention, not just for an hour, but daily, relentlessly, with purpose. Think of J.K. Rowling, writing Harry Potter in cafes with her baby beside her. No perfect setup, no peace and quiet, just fierce clarity. This is what I'm building. This is where I'm going. This is what I refuse to compromise. And you don't need to write novels, but you do need to claim your mental real estate. Because if you don't plant your own focus, weeds will grow, and they won't ask permission. Here's the brutal truth. Distraction is easier than ever. You're not weak. You're surrounded. Your environment is built to break your concentration. Every ping, every alert, every swipe, they're not just interruptions. They're training your brain to expect interruption. And that makes deep work feel unnatural. Focus feel foreign. But just like any habit, you can retrain it. You can teach your brain to lock in again. Start small. Choose one task, just one. Set a timer. Turn your phone to airplane mode. Clear the desk and begin. 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. That's how you rebuild your focus muscle. Not with willpower, but with rep after rep. And when your mind wanders, Gently bring it back, not with shame, with authority. We're not doing that right now. We're here. That single redirection, done over and over, becomes the foundation of mastery. And here's the shift most people miss. Focus isn't just about what you do. It's about what you refuse to do. Every time you say no to distraction, you're saying yes to something sacred, your direction, your progress, your mission, your peace. Because when your focus is fractured, your confidence breaks with it. You feel scattered, foggy, like nothing's working. But when your focus is disciplined, even small efforts start to stack. You start completing what you begin. You start remembering what matters. You start building trust with yourself again. And that trust is everything. Let's be honest. You've likely had moments where you sat down to do something important, write, plan, work, create, and ended up in a scroll loop an hour later. That wasn't a time problem. That was a focus problem. And it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. This is the mindset shift. Discipline is love in action. Discipline says, I believe in what I'm building enough to protect it. So protect it. Build a system. Use timers. Clear the digital clutter. Unsubscribe. Silence the phone. Create rituals that make focus easier. More importantly, choose your one thing. Each day decide, what deserves my best energy today? Not the loudest task, not the most urgent, the most important. And then, give it everything. Because the cost of distraction isn't just lost time, it's lost potential. Every minute spent scattered is a minute you could have spent moving forward. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more disciplined your focus becomes, the more freedom you gain. Freedom from stress, because you're no longer juggling. Freedom from guilt, because you're doing what matters. Freedom from self-doubt, because you trust yourself to stay the course. Focus isn't about being busy, it's about being deliberate. It's not about doing more, it's about doing right. So from this day forward, choose depth over distraction. Choose quality over chaos. Choose direction over noise. Because you can't build a meaningful life in fragments. You need time blocks, mental space, clean air for your vision to breathe. And when you protect your focus, something incredible happens. Your results begin to rise. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're trying smarter. Your mind gets sharper, your choices clearer, your identity stronger. And as all of this locks in, the most powerful shift occurs. You become consistent. Not because you're forcing it, but because consistency now feels natural, automatic, aligned. And that brings us to the final step in this journey. The one that anchors everything you've built so far. The habit of showing up daily, not because you have to, but because it's who you are. Because the person you've become, the focused, disciplined, reflective, growing version of you, is now ready to step into consistency, not as effort, but as identity. You've come a long way, not in miles, but in mindset. You've peeled back layers, questioned old habits, and leaned into new ways of being. But none of that matters. Not one breakthrough, not one insight, unless it sticks. And the only thing that makes it stick is consistency. Consistency is the final gate, the bridge between who you're becoming and who you remain. The truth is, every habit you've built so far, waking with purpose, planning with intention, acting through resistance, respecting your inner voice, it all leads to this. Showing up over and over until it's no longer something you try to do. It's just who you are. But let's be clear, consistency doesn't mean perfection. You will miss days. You will slip. That's not failure. That's human. The win isn't in avoiding the fall. It's in how fast you return, because this is how consistency really works. Not as a straight line, but as a return rate. How fast do you get back on track after a setback? How resilient is your rhythm when life throws you off? That's what builds staying power. And here's the thing most people forget. Consistency is built, not found. You don't wait to feel consistent. You become consistent by repeating simple, clear behaviors every single day, until they imprint on your nervous system, until they embed into your identity, until they're so natural you feel off when you don't do them. At first, you have to think about it. What am I building today? Eventually, it becomes reflex. This is what I do. This is who I am. But between here and there, there's a war, a quiet war, between who you've been and who you're choosing to become. And that war is won, not in grand declarations, but in small, boring acts of repetition. Consistency feels like nothing in the moment. That's why it's so dangerous to skip. Because the cost of inconsistency isn't always felt immediately. It builds slowly, quietly, until you look around and wonder why everything is back to how it used to be. But if you stay with it, if you lock in, even on the days when it's inconvenient, uninspiring, or flat out hard, you get something most people never do. Compound momentum. And that momentum changes everything. You stop needing to start over because you never truly stop. You just adjust, then continue. And when people see your life, they'll call it discipline. They'll call it strength. But what it really is identity. Because when a habit becomes your identity, you no longer rely on external motivation. You are the system. You are the standard. You are the consistency. Think of it this way. A tree doesn't decide every day whether or not to grow. It doesn't reevaluate its worth every week. It just grows. Quietly. Continuously. Without drama. That's what your habits must become. A natural outflow of who you are. And that's when things begin to feel effortless. Not because the work is easier, but because you've become stronger. You've repeated the process long enough to wear a new groove in your life. And that groove begins to carry you, not down, but forward. Your mornings become purposeful, not because you remind yourself to focus, but because you expect to. Your boundaries hold, not because you're fighting every decision, but because no now comes naturally. Your reflection deepens, not because you force it, but because your mind craves clarity. Your identity shifts, not because you reached some goal, but because your actions now match your values every single day. And that, right there, is what creates unshakable transformation. Not talent, not motivation, not once-in-a-lifetime breakthroughs. Consistency, quiet, repeated commitment to who you want to become. And here's the most beautiful part. You don't have to fight forever. You just have to finish the rewiring. Stay long enough for the new you to become normal. Then one day, without warning, you'll catch yourself doing the hard thing automatically. You'll show up for yourself, not because you read it in a book or heard it in a video, but because it's who you are. That's how you win quietly. That's how you become undeniable. Not in what you say, but in what you repeat. And so we end where we began, with a choice. A choice to take today seriously, to stop preparing and start becoming, to make consistency the floor, not the ceiling, to step into the version of you that doesn't hope for progress, but lives it. Predictably, powerfully, repeatedly. Because when habits become identity, identity becomes destiny. And now, it's yours. You've made it through more than a list of habits. You've walked the path of rewiring your life from the inside out. Slowly, deliberately, honestly. This wasn't about hacks or hype. It was about returning to your power. A power that was never missing, just buried beneath years of default settings. This journey has shown you one undeniable truth. You are not at the mercy of your past. You're not trapped in old stories. You're not broken. You're unpracticed. But practice is what rewrites patterns. What once felt impossible now feels familiar, and what once required force now flows. Let that settle in. You are no longer starting over. You are continuing. You have a blueprint. You have proof. You've acted, reflected, redirected, grown. The greatest myth is that transformation needs to be dramatic. In reality, it's made in silence, in early mornings, in micro decisions, in the invisible grind of showing up when no one's clapping. You've done that. And because of that, you've earned something sacred, self-respect. This is the true reward of consistency. Not just results, relationship with yourself. A bond built on follow-through, on alignment, on trust. And that bond, it doesn't fade. Because once you've proven to yourself that you can change, no one can take that from you. Not circumstance, not criticism, not failure, nothing. So where do you go from here? You keep walking. You keep building. You stay close to your practices, not as chores, but as anchors. You revisit your purpose. You protect your energy. You refine your self-talk. You reflect daily. You move forward, not perfectly, but permanently. There is no finish line. There's just this moment, and what you repeat in it. So let your life speak for itself. Let your habits reveal your standards. Let your consistency express your identity. And when the world asks, "How did you change?" you'll answer without words, "I did it every day, until it became me."